Hello everyone. Hopefully my voice is loud and clear. I would like to share some interesting ideas about the future, and so the title, Our Hearts Will Decide the Future of Our Brains, arose to me. And in the subtitle I've written how the inner realms, let me see what I exactly wrote. When the inner realms serve the outer realms. You know, this evening, before starting this talk right now, I was thinking about the future and how we will walk into the future and how many unborn people there will be in the future, and how we are creating the space for them. We are creating their roads, pretty much. You know, in human history, we have people create a distinction between the heart space and one's brain. The brain space, let's call it, which is mind. The heart and the brain, for example, Sri Ramana Maharshi, this enlightened sage from India, he considered that the source of intelligence is not from the brain, the source of an intelligence that surpasses the sensory, but it's from the heart. You know, and when we think about the heart, some people feel it may imply emotional more, but I would say the heart is nature. And it is abidance with one's true nature. And in human existence, in human living, the human being wakes up to a world, navigates in that world, and finds itself in situations where whatever is happening, before it makes a decision, there are like two spaces, two sort of filtrations before the person makes a decision. First, if you're someone new listening to this talk, these talks of mine, I have coined the term the inner realm and the outer realm, and I say that in front of our eyes we are objects, we see objects, behind our eyes we see subjects, and there is a relationship here, but behind our eyes there is more than subjects. Subjects can be images. A subject is what is contained in language. So when a human being, let's say person A wakes up in the world and finds himself in a situation where there's person B, C, D, and there's a sort of situation going on where person A has to justify to itself its decision and what kind of decision it will make in the moment. In regards to the inner realms, there is the space of the analytical dimensions of the left brain that people consider, where a person is looking at the geometry of the moment. And the the geometry of the moment, where the person's looking at the geometry of the moment, then there is the animation of the geometry of the moment, in the sense, well, what will happen? That means, imagine person A and there's person B, and person B is hanging by the edge of a cliff, and person A is there wondering what to do. Person A can look at the geometry of the situation, see that there's a human being, in some sense a human person is holding the edge of the cliff, and that it's as if there's the present geometry of the moment, the shape of the moment, and then there is what will happen to the moment, which then it brings emotion. So let's say through the analytical dimensions of the left brain, the human being considers if he doesn't grab person B's arm, person B is going to fall from the cliff. So then, after the analytics, let's say the analysis of the left brain goes to a sort of picture that, as if the geometry of the moment, as if in the inner realms of person A, as he's seeing person B hanging by the edge of the cliff, person A sees that person B may fall any second, right? Then, once the consequence of the geometry is known, then emotions arise, and instantly person A runs and grabs person B's hand. You see? So you see, it's as if there is, it's as if our left brain, and of course this whole left brain, right brain thing I'm saying, it's what in current culture they're acknowledging, but I feel that the brain it's one brain. Now the left brain, the left side of the brain, it begins playing with the geometry, going forth in the geometry, and then based on the consequence of the geometry in comparison to a value system. That means if person, imagine you're some being that just teleported into the world, let's say person A is not even a person, it's just some attention that is just for the first time appeared on the edge of the cliff, and you see person B hanging there. Imagine that person A doesn't know anything, doesn't know the concept of gravity, doesn't know the concept of the fall, doesn't know what will happen. So then emotions will not arise. And when we look at our species, our civilization, we're going into the future, and there was a point where we were in the jungle and the ecosystems gave us the laws of our mind, you can say. That means it was as if the creature was actually being moved by nature. It's separated from nature somehow through a sort of subjective evolution of its own consciousness, and then began to realize that it can move itself. Now that it has to move itself, it has to reprocess, it has to realize again the implications of the ecosystem and the implications of what man has created in the ecosystem. We find ourselves in a civilization, I call it civilization 1.0, where there is 8 billion human beings growing. We as human beings, in some sense, there is life is in some sense simple now. You know, even though we have stepped into the information age, people are not really caring for information that much. They're trying to emotionally live their life, and this is important, that one has a sort of balanced emotional journey in the lifetime. But the emotions come to a point of impatience, and it could be that we are not caring for the future of the geometry we see. That means it's like we're inside a civilization and we're not caring about the future of it. And so our emotions are coming from the present of the shape of the civilization rather than what it will look like, and then the emotions retaliate. There's the emotion of a sort of retaliation. The reason I chose this picture for this evening's wallpaper is simply because I feel that the future can get to this point. It can get to a point where there's so many human beings, there's so much complexity, there is so many dimensions to things, that it's like right now we feel we're small, and the future is going to feel really small. And so it's as if this part of civilization is going to come into the spotlight, and there's going to be shadows to civilization. Parts of civilization where nobody is seeing who is there or what is dwelling there. The future, many people feel it's going to be weird, but that's just the nature of the future. That's just the nature of novelty. You know, our ancestors, a time traveler right now, imagine, could, if we had time travel technology, a time traveler could go in the past, bring our ancestors to this current world where everybody's on social media, and that ancestor's mind would be blown. Like, that ancestor would be like, you guys are communicating invisibly. People are engaging pretty much the environment that their eyes gave access to. Now, with the development of technology, we're accessing environments that we are not in. The other day I was looking at Netherlands. I have this, somehow this intuitive passion to go live there at some point. And so I'm here in Toronto, Canada, but I can see what is happening there. Or for example, right now, I'm live streaming and people from around the world are hearing what I'm saying. But back in the day, if you wanted to hear somebody talk, you had to journey literally in a caravan, or like get a bunch of horses and make a really long journey. Emotions, to me, seem to be the sort of reaction to the type of thought that arises. If a person, they call this single-pointed concentration, if a person looks at one thing for a long time, just one point or one object, first in concentration, there's a single, like you look at a single point of an objective phenomenon. Then later on in meditation, it becomes paying attention, concentrating on a single pointed thought. So a person's emotion arises from what is happening in their outer realms and what will happen to their outer realms, as if the brain copy-pastes the current geometry of the moment, visualizes how that geometry will change, and then gets an emotional reaction to that visualization of the change. We as 8 billion human beings, we are promoting individualism. The individual is very important, of course, in this era, in this phase of history. And people don't even know what collectivity would look like in the future, what a collective mind would look like. Right now, there's one biological body, there is, you can say, one natural mind. But in the future, how this will change, it's like we don't know. But one thing that I'm seeing right now, and really this is what I can talk about, is that human beings are paying attention to themselves more than others based on the nature of the design. I mean, of course, there is survival of the fittest, or like the aim of life is survival. As if in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you need physiological survival, then you go up to psychological survival, and then you go towards self-actualization. So because we are physical creatures, we have to focus on our own survival. This means from the moment the human being wakes up, it has to have more attention on itself than on others. If a person has more attention on others and not on themselves, then there becomes a sort of deficiency. Imagine there is some people have self-deficiency, some people have other deficiency. And some people you can even add, like, have world deficiency. What I mean by this is that if a person's attention is on others, it's as if they're not cultivating the dimensions of their self. If their attention is too much on themselves, they're not cultivating the dimensions of others. And if they're just looking at themselves and others, they may be ignoring how the world is changing beyond human thought. You see, civilization is where human ideas are, it's not just people that are living, it's like human ideas are living in the minds of people, which are motivating their actions and their behavior. So civilization is a sort of man-made ideascape, if I can say that. A sort of ideological setting or something that has been set by man, which right now in 2021 everybody's like, yeah, this is me, that is you, and we have names, and our names are subjects, of course. This was one realization I came to as I was giving these talks, where I suddenly noticed, wait a minute, we say that everything is like a lot of ideas and whatnot are man-made, but what the idea of man, how can that idea be man-made? You see, so intelligence at some point surpasses the idea of the human. It may appear human, it may be in that presence, but in that present experience of the human, but prior to the idea of the human, there was no idea of the human. There was just a creature in the space-time continuum. And we as creatures in the space-time continuum, we have evolved. When you look at civilization, it's as if there has come a linguistic simulation. Some people say that back in the day, what magic was, not elemental magic where you see in fantasy shows, but what magic was in some sense, it was how language was newly introduced to the species, and some people had figured out that language creates a world inside a world. So imagine if somebody comes and says you're a failure, it's like that's painting a picture over, you in the present moment, where you don't know if you're going to fail or succeed. Right, so if you believe in the language, you get captured by the language, you get defined by the language, and so even life may go many years, but you might be stuck on that, the language that the mind received, in a certain moment. Now, what I'm trying to say with this whole magic kind of being language back in the day, there's clues to it. It's like what are, back in the day, the archetype of magic was that, like, whether the witch or wizard or whatever archetype was there, that person was using the concept of spells. Right now in the world, we have spelling, for example. So what it is, it's a suggestion of another world inside the world, and if your attention again goes to that world, you miss out on reality. This is why somebody can be in their inner realms and their outer realms will pass and they will not see it. Or for example, you see addiction psychology. In addiction psychology, the person feels so bad about what they're doing that they forget that they're in the outer realms, and the more emotional they are, the more pulled they are in their inner realms, so the less motivation they have to actually change their outer realms. Now, what I'm saying with this whole language thing is that the species right now, we as 8 billion Homo sapiens creatures on this rock in the middle of nowhere, we have been enchanted by language, and there was a time where I felt this was a bad thing, but the greatest realization I got about language, that it's a technology. That means a technology can be used in a correct way or in a wrong way, you can say. A person, for example, let's say knife. A knife was like primitive technology. So a person can use the knife to cut fruit, prepare a meal, or the person can use a knife to hurt people. You see, the knife doesn't have a mind. The person who has the mind uses that object, and how they use it suggests the morality of it. It's the same thing with all ideological systems and language. That means it's not that religions are good or evil, it is that it is a person's nature in how they respond to how the language enters their mind and what sort of film it creates, and how much they are convinced by that film, or they realize that there is the great unknown. The great unknown is the presence, as Carl Jung said, of the collective unconscious. And what that means is there are things I don't know, and there are things you don't know, and there's things everybody doesn't know. And that is the vastness of the collective unconscious. People say knowledge is power, true, but if you wonder about where the power of knowledge is coming from, it is coming from this massive unknown space, and it's just the effort of the creature to look and try to open the curtains, or or with a lantern run into the dark. This universe, this whole cosmic event is like a dark forest. And we, our brains, our minds, they are like, again, the lantern or flashlight or torch, and where in some sense we have one lifetime to use the light of human intelligence to discover more and more about the realm. And some people may be like Mr.Within, are you saying that the meaning of life is to kind of advance the outer, to care more for civilization than for the self? That means, should a person just be a candle that is sitting on a table, or should this candle be moving around, or as the Buddha said, attempting to light other candles? I would say that some people, if one just lives for themselves, life may have certain dimensions of meaning, but when the moment they feel they're exiting the realm, it may suddenly become meaningless. There was this show called Shingeki no Kyojin. There was this incredible commander and fictional character in it called Commander Erwin Smith. And there's this intense situation, and one of the new soldiers comes up to Commander Erwin Smith and says, "Is it all meaningless?" Like they're all about to die in the show. These giants are attacking the city or whatever. And so Commander Erwin, and the person comes and says, "Is it meaningless?" As if is life meaningless? And Commander Erwin Smith says, "Life is not meaningless. The meaning of life is to live for those who will find the meaning one day." Do you see? It's as if right now there's so many unknown variables, and it's kind of like our knowledge is in the minority of this cosmic expanse. But if we care for the future, it's as if it's like there's this, it's like the eyes of the future are open. The eyes, imagine the species has eyes, and these eyes have not fully opened. And the effort of every human being alive, at least in my vision, is in some sense to keep expanding, the horizon of human perception, and to find a contentment of how it will shift in the future. So what I'm trying to say is that if there was this attitude to, as if maybe we may not be able to solve the problem, but we go as far as we can, and then we pass the torch, and we exit the realm, and then that generation goes as far as they can, and then next generation goes as far as they can, and it's as if when the future generations, very far in the future, they open their eyes, they will be incredibly honored by how far their ancestors pushed the world, moved and roamed the space-time continuum. So let me go back to this idea that there is a subjective world overlaid upon an objective nature. If one was to say what is the purpose of physical existence, objective existence, to be honest, objective existence can't have any other purpose than just being in the moment, existing in the moment. But if you wonder about what is the purpose of the subjective experience, not just the objective existence, that's where really our ability as a species comes forth. The type of subjects that dwell in our minds, that means if you saw every person alive as if on a Matrix screen, like the movie Matrix, like there was a screen showing everything in the Matrix, you would see the language in the minds of people being the codes, being like the codes on the screen. Now, it depends on how these codes are presented, or how the human being allows language to live through their mind. You see, it's not people just living in the world, ideas are living in people. Right now, me talking and sharing these ideas, it's as if my perception has come to this conclusion, and so these conclusions appear as subjects. When I say in the title, our hearts will decide the future of our brains, I have seen in my inner realms, in the space of my mind, potentials of the future. I have seen that, I mean, obviously there are two potentials. One is like how much we choose to stay natural based on our definition of nature. And the other would be, in some sense, how much we give into the unnatural and we become defined by the unnatural. One possibility I've seen is that people in the future will start replacing their body parts with technological body parts, and then it may get to a certain point, because the human being has a desire to update, to upgrade. This desire to update and upgrade may suddenly make the person where first, their hand became robotic, then their arm became robotic, then their legs became robotic, then their, up to their neck became robotic, and then there was only the brain left, and imagine that also suddenly became robotic. So there can be a future of humanity where the species is like, okay, if we want to continue and we're okay being robots, then we can access the illusion of immortality, because robotic embodiment may endure longer. That means if you were to visualize a civilization of robots, you would see that all the consciousness is in like one machine, in one center of the civilization. So people, their robotic bodies could be destroyed, but their consciousness would still exist. And for example, they would just, create a new robotic body, and the consciousness would enter into that, But the other angle is human beings want to slow down this technological future, where it's as if the species is being, right now we're like living naturally, it's like our natural lives are being vacuumed into a sort of cyberspace realism. So what I mean by this is as if technology is like this cube, and this cube is vacuuming in nature, this box. And if we are to ignore that, we would have an evolutionary return to nature, and the species would do something incredible, which I suggested in one of the talks, where there will be like a 200-year ban on technological innovation. So it's as if the species realizes that technology may become uncontrollable, may become dangerous, may intervene with our naturalism. So there could be, like, imagine if all the nations stopped fighting one another and began looking at how the world is going forth. It would be as if like a 200-year ban. So it would be like for 200 years, no technological advancement, everything stops, right? And then after that 200 years, it's like everything begins. Then it's like 200 years of sophisticated technological advancement, then 200-year pause, as if a sort of measure, as sort of speed bumps on technological innovation. Then the other option, so one option is we become technology, the other we go into cyberspace, we become cyberspace beings, and the other option is an evolutionary return to nature. Now there's something strange going on here, at least in my school of thought, where I feel this is not something that's easy to say, but I feel that the purpose of life is not individual. And if anybody gets angry at me saying this, I won't blame you, because you see, we are like particles moving in a field, and we're not aware that there is a field. Now, in the future, that field could become cyberspace, could be a technological collective field, but when you look at the ancient yogis and mystics, you in some sense see that there was a field of nature, as if what we're trying to achieve through technology, it's as if we have already achieved as how the nature of the universe, how the nature of existence is. for me, I'm a bit old school, and I am trying to somehow keep nature, that I'm trying to steer my attention, and with this whole project, the audiences, towards a value, a hidden value in nature. You see, it's as if we think that we figured everything out about nature, and materialism is the ultimate justification, because if one has a materialistic perspective, there is no right and wrong in this, by the way, guys. I'm just sharing perspectives. If we were to look at materialism, and if you were a philosopher wondering, okay, what does materialistic entity mean? Let's say you're an analytical philosopher. So you would be concluding that, first of all, chemical reactions in the brain are hallucinating everything. So in some sense, it's not that there's a person here with a biological body or even having an ability of a soul. Materialism is the most at this fascinating, at the same time strangest notion, where it's as if something that is not intelligent is projecting an intelligent illusion. As if these atoms, this atomic existence is somehow, so let me say it this way, matter evolved into a subject, an object somehow evolved into a subject to itself. That is not something that one can ignore. That is one of the most fascinating and remarkable incidents that has occurred in existence. That there is something that can notice the existence, as if there is so much light illuminating the world, but imagine if there was no one to see it, but now there is someone to see it, and there is 8 billion of them. There's 8 billion seers of a changing world. So, based on the outcome that our species chooses, I feel it has become too late. I feel not only this creature stood up too early, but at the same time stood up on its 2 legs too early, but at the same time the introduction of the internet and the information age has in some sense bypassed our natural evolution. That means there's some, you can say, philosophers who they say that in the study of consciousness, people are like, is consciousness just starting from the brain? Let's say somebody says that consciousness is originating from the brain. There would be a sociologist who could potentially, let's say a sociologist instead of a philosopher. Sociologists would say, hey, it can't be just the biology. It's all the interference, the epigenetics, everything outside of the biology that is influencing the biology. So, in the same way that people in the future may feel that cyberspace intervened with nature, it's as if civilization intervened with a prior nature. Society is like cyberspace before cyberspace. I would say it like this. It's as if you were to look at the simulations of reality, let's say cyberspace is the future simulation, language is the current simulation, which in talks I've called it the linguistic simulation. And so language is our current simulation. If you went before language, I would say just societal acknowledgement would be a sort of simulation in nature. That means when you look at it is true that wolves, for example, there's a wolf pack, but the sophistication of the human being, how we started as tribes, and these tribes somehow understood that they have to hunt and gather, and so we objectively hunted and gathered until we reached the point where we started subjectively hunting and gathering. And so we became more a subject than an object, Now, let's say we create the second scenario where everything is going to become, like people are going to become robots in the future, or as how Terence McKenna the scholar, he said that human beings seem to be the intermediaries for machines, as if we are a stepping stone in what nature is trying to create. We are not the main event of nature. As if individual human consciousness is not the main event. But for us as human beings, we're saying, yeah, it is the main event, So if in the future there's going to be a technological encapsulation of the natural entity, first of all, there has to be an incredible study of the nature of the mind and the nature of where subjects dwell in regards to memory and visualization, past memory and future visualization, happening in that same invisible room where we're saying it's our mind. You see, the mind gives access to content. That means every person's mind has content, but it's not content that is materialistic where you can touch. Right now I could visualize, for example, an apple hovering in the air, but I can't grab that apple and eat it. Do you know? So if we as a species, as human beings, are to try to retaliate or try to somehow respond to this technological future, we have to find solutions and strategies for our physical biological living and for our subjective living. That means we have to strategize our outer life and our inner life, both individually and collectively. That means, what is the outer life of the individual one person going to look like? What would the outer life of 8 billion human beings look like? And then what will the inner life of one person look like? And what would the inner life of 8 billion human beings look like? Sometimes, I speak about this concept of advanced communication, but there are moments where I wonder, what is this urge of the human being to communicate? And it is really world transference. What that means is it's as if we see things behind our eyes and then we share them in front of our eyes. And then what's in the outer realms changes, and then the inner realms changes, and it's a sort of like, like those wrestling, those like WWE or whatever, like wrestling shows where, one person taps out and then the other person comes in, not taps out, but as if like the wrestlers shift. Right, so it's as if there's certain phases in history where we lived more as an object than a subject. Now we're living more as a subject. Yeah. So, 8 billion human beings, I have personally, in these talks of mine, perceived a strategy for the species, and I have made a bold conclusion where I have said that 3,600 years from now, the species will reach a point called the language threshold, where we think of it as if we just continue as a biological organism, it would imply pretty much we're going to have, excuse my language, but we're going to have sex all over the universe. That means we think overpopulation is a problem now, and people are having hostile views to overpopulation, but I will say the moment we develop sky cities and interstellar cities after that, it will become something where there is so much space that there is no need to, kick people out of the civilization or dismiss human intelligence. We will realize that 8 billion human beings doesn't just mean 8 billion bodies that are overpopulating the earth. It means 8 billion problem solvers, 8 billion eyes that had never existed before until now. If a person seeks individual glory, they will miss out on all the other opportunities where a collective system or team could have gone forth. So in my school of thought, before we reach that point called the language, we advance beyond the language threshold, it will be a point where we no longer will be individuals. It's as if we have lived so much as a biological entity where people are like, okay, what now? And imagine we have lived so long as a technological cyberspace entity that we're like, what now? So eventually it goes beyond conception. There's something I am reminded by about religion, where it's as if there's this notion that God created human beings and everything, and then, like when the apocalypse happens, everything returns back to God. But the idea of God is being considered as inconceivable in the Abrahamic traditions. So what that means is as if this whole existence had an inconceivable source, and then it's going to have a return back into that inconceivable source. It's a sort of boomerang of existential conception coming back to the inconceivable. The way I envisioned it is that in the outer realms, in our physical life, the greatest idea, and anybody can challenge me on this, is the advanced civilization. Everybody will begin realizing that if we create an advanced civilization that is filled with backup systems, it will in some sense be a civilization where an individual's mistake can be recycled into the collective's victory. But right now, an individual mistake can destroy the collective possibilities of the future. As simple as somebody pressing a button and nuclear bombs falling into there. So, in the outer realms, we advance civilization. In the inner realms, we advance communication. If we consider that the mind and body, René Descartes talked about the mind-body dualism as if the mind is in its own dimension and the body is in its own dimension, and they don't necessarily have a relationship. Not they don't have a relationship, but they necessarily are not the same, right? So it's as if like your inner life after your body is gone, in accordance to what's his name, René Descartes, was in some sense it would remain. That means your mind's life has an eternal quality to it because it's in a different room than the body is. When I talk about advancing communication, regardless of how far we see it in the future, that means imagine this person standing in the picture, looking at this, imagine this person was wondering about the future, just like how right now I'm wondering about way in the future. I'm saying that right now this person in this picture, imagine this person wondering about way in the future, right? And the question would be as if, when will individual living change? Or when will collective individual living change? And I feel that it is inevitable. That means just like some people may think cyberspace is inevitable, I would say going towards the inconceivable is also inevitable. There's this poem from the Sufi mystic Rumi that I share often, this Sufi mystic poet from 700 years ago. And Rumi says, I died as a mineral and I became a plant. I died as a plant and I rose to animal. I died as an animal and I was man. When was I less by dying? Why should I fear death? I shall die once more as man, to soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood I must pass on to that which no mind has ever conceived. That means we may think that we're all have this innate desire to, in some sense, just succeed, but we don't realize that the succession of nature is towards the inconceivable. That means it's as if a reality, one thing we know is that change is happening, and we say that existence is made of energy, right? We say this existential activity is some sort of energy, and energy is seen scientifically as something that cannot be, based on the first law of thermodynamics, in some sense it cannot be created or destroyed. It just changes from form to form. So what that means is as if there is an energy here, and what we are considering as individual life is how it's changing from form to form. But I'm saying that in the future, this energy that has become conscious of itself, which is another word for soul, in some sense, will realize that it is in a state of beyond transformation. So we are transforming to a state beyond transformation. And in the very far future, I'm seeing this. Now, this state, if you take in René Descartes' mind-body dualism, right, it's as if there is a space, or how Plato would say time is the moving image of eternity, as if time is a coin, and one side of it, temporary creatures being born and dying, and the other side of it, it's just eternal being. So guys, while I have a sip from my coffee, I'm going to look at the chat section. Welcome everybody. Feel free to ask any question. I'll try my best to answer. Justin says, do you think human life will be biological or more like a hyper-connected consciousness where you aren't identified by a body? Or do you think it will be a combination of physical and technological? All of them, but at different phases. So what that means is that right now human life is biological, then it's going to become a sort of biology infused. Pretty much right now we have imaginations, but we're not living inside them. We may react to it. That means a person may close their eyes and visualize like skydiving and suddenly get an emotion they have never gotten before. As if they've sat down and in their inner realms they're perceiving an incident, and that incident is leading to reactions, in the present physical moment. So cyberspace would be an implication of us not being able to just live to walk in a biological space, but we will be able to walk in our minds. We will be able to live in our minds. And believe it or not, those ancient yogis that went into the cave and they would go into samadhi for a very long time, months, years, whatnot, where they would just be sitting somewhere, and it was as if another dimension was preserving their whole physical intelligence, as if you had the notion of the soul had returned home. And when it had returned home, there was no individual sitting in a cave. It was the universe being. We cannot ignore technology, of course, so there will be a percentage of the population where technology would infuse with. All those people who are considering themselves as materialists and nihilists, they will pretty much look at life and being like, wait a minute, so it's going to end and the show's going to finish, so while the show's going on, I'm going to try to stay here as long as I can. So it would be as if technology will be the salvation of the materialist. But the immaterialist, not the ideologically bound immaterialist, but the experiential immaterialist, it's as if there was never a person here. So Justin, in your question in the chat section where you say, or more like a hyper-connected consciousness, where you aren't identified by a body, the ancient yogis were saying that's in the room first, then this. So as if a person just in one instant just stops and is still. In stillness, you are not a person, you are the presence of the universe, observed, or being observed. You see, Justin, what you're saying is very interesting, because you are pretty much, it's not just you. In this talk, when I say in the future we'll go beyond the language threshold, that would mean we become conscious of the pantheistic nature of reality. What that means is that it's not that if the soul is in another dimension, right, that is overlaid upon this physical dimension, that means anything can have a soul. A person can hold a coffee cup and suddenly be like, oh my God, my best friend, So suddenly we can animate it. But there is also this thing that that which moves on its own and that which is given movement, right? For example, when somebody kicks a soccer ball in the air, can we say that that soccer ball has a soul in that moment, that it's flying into the air as if it has some sort of animate intelligence? Or was it the effect of some force? So Anyways, to keep walking towards the future, and thank you for the questions, guys. Keep it coming. So, in my vision, as if I'm just one person among 8 billion human beings on a rock in the middle of nowhere, and this nowhere, in the middle of a universe with a billion trillion stars, there is so much existence going on, and we're such a small part of it, that it's like either we are consider we're the small and endlessly explore the big, or we realize that the big is being the small, as Plato said, as above, so below. That means it's like just like how we find human intelligence below, we can have a sort of a perception of reality as if it is not a persona, but it is animate. It has a body. That means the universe is like the body of a higher dimensional being, But in regards to back to the idea of a future that's going to be technological and what can human beings do about it, there's this important futurist by the name of Ray Kurzweil was suggested around the year 2045 or 50, super intelligent computers are going to wake up, and when super intelligent computers are going to wake up, Neil Bostrom is another important person to look up to, and so when intelligent computers, in some sense, they activate, they would be able to update themselves beyond us being able to control it, And so, in my perception, in the time that we have before the year 2050, communication needs to advance ridiculously. That means if we have this approach where we say technology, there is technology, then there is the user of technology. Right? And so in the future, if the technology is going to become advanced, we have to, as the users, also become advanced to have a relationship with it. Some people may fear the technological the cyberspace era, the super intelligent computer era, and so they may want to quickly find a way to connect their brains to computers, right? But I would say it's co-inhabitation. That means there's so many things that we're living alongside. It's as if people, they don't try to control whales in the ocean. It's like the whale is in its own space and man is in its own space. To advance communication, people have no choice other than to start talking and to start sharing their inner realms. We have to become hunter-gatherers of our inner realms, and not in the sense that we're fighting over truth, where somebody's like, yo, truth is what I've seen, and the other person's like, no man, truth is what I've seen, and then it's like war begins. It becomes something where we realize, okay, there's the space of the mind. Every living creature, every living human being right now, their inner life, they have an inner life and the outer life. Now how can the inner life, how can the inner realms serve the outer realms? Because if you look at evolution, right, we were just creatures walking on this rock, just roaming, moving on this rock. Now we can communicate. That means it was as if the purpose of evolution was to develop creatures that could make noise and then have a memory of that noise. That means we interlink sound to letters, and letters to an image, inner image. So as if there's something in the outer realms, I'm seeing this cup. Now there's the cup, which is letters. It's the language component of it. It's the subject of it. And then when I close my eyes, it's also, there's an image there of the subject. So language is a technology that in some sense is there to help us be able to manage and pilot between our outer realm and our inner realm. To, in some sense, be able to do something as a mind. Imagine we had evolved and we didn't have mouths. How crazy would that be? Think as if like we had evolved and there was no mouth. There was no voice box. There was no ability to generate sound. So really, the future of civilization is based on how human beings use their mouth, or what they say. That means speech holds like the blueprint of civilization. So if creatures have evolved to communicate, and if we consider how long the universe has been here empirically, we would say that language evolved yesterday. Like, language is such a recent development. And because right now we're living in a society where everybody's like, yeah man, I got a mind, and then you ask him what is the mind, the person's like, I don't know man. Sometimes I look at the dictionary, its definition of a mind, and I'm like, well, who had the, excuse my language, who had the balls to give a definition to this? Who had the spheres to give a definition to this? There's so many things that we are just putting a sticker on, but it's actually unknown. And people should actually be excited that we don't know. Let me tell you why. If reality was known, imagine the edge of the universe was definite and we could be known. So imagine like we build spacecraft, and this spacecraft went to the edge of the universe, or the edge of how far the observable universe could be seen, and they hit a glass wall. Imagine the whole universe was in like a glass sphere, but inside of it was like a mirror. So if the universe had an edge, and we reach that edge, we'd be like, okay, we've explored the outer realms. The outer realms can be no more, and the only thing would be left to explore are inner realms, to start living as minds more than bodies, or trying to see the edge of the mind, right? But now the good thing is the outer realm exploration is infinite. That means we don't know the edge of the universe. It's the limitless sky. And also behind your eyes, it's a limitless space. You can call it even a sky. Like, there's an outer sky and there's the inner sky, and beyond the inner sky there's that which no mind can conceive, as the poet Rumi suggested. Okay, so I turned down the music, guys. Alright. So, inner realm strategies, outer realm strategies. Outer realm strategies, we need to preserve the biological body. The tech sector has to focus on healing the human being, not replacing the biology of the human being with machine parts, but in some sense healing the human being. Healing the biology. In science fiction work of mine, I created this concept where I called it Immortal Juice, where this person goes to the store and he's like, hey man, do you have another bottle of Immortal Juice? And the person's like, hey man, one bottle's enough. As if you can drink something and the immune system becomes so sophisticated and advanced, that in some sense the body is preserved for a long time, where the lifespan of human beings biologically can become thousands of years. And imagine in that Immortal Juice there was something where it's, for example, there is age and there is the body. That means it's like when I say, let's say a human being lived 3,000 years, 1,000 years would be like 33 years of the body's growth. And the next 33 years would be like the next 1,000 years, and then the next 33 years would be like the 3,000 years, right? So back in the future, potentially we may see a very old person and we'll be like, yo man, this guy's celebrating his 30,000, 3,000 first birthday. It's all about the relationship of a creature with energy, and then with a non-physical energy, and then with a physical world. There has been moments in my life And I speak through the context of a mystic, and a mystic in simple terms can be said someone who is the lover of the unknown. That means there were explorers in the outer realms, and they went and found new lands, and then there were mystics, and mystics were like, okay, I'm here for a little while, my body is temporary, you know, there's so many, like the universe appears infinite, so there's going to be infinite ideologies, so if truth is an idea, then it can endlessly, infinitely change. So the mystics went to find a state where it had surpassed, or I shouldn't say surpassed, a state that was here before the object and the subject was. And that state is a state beyond the language threshold, and in some sense, naturally, we have attained it. What that means is there has been enough people, enough human beings who have experienced this state in our history where it is a collective memory, it cannot be ignored. It's like a memory of the species that can't be forgotten. Where the human being was in the world, and there was, for example, advice given to it to be in the world but not of it, but then the human being became the world, and there was no longer one body. Everything in existence was your body. You became the winds of evolution behind the eyes of every living creature. But that's mysticism. In the outer realms, we preserve the biology as long as we can. We quickly advance civilization in the sense that physiological survival becomes automated. That's one thing that technology can help us with. You know, in the future they say robots are going to take people's jobs, so there's going to be like a factory owner, and this factory owner is going to be like, why do I have human beings working for me? You know, I'm just going to pay one giant power bill and have 24/7 production, you know, with robot employees. Right, so all the physical labor jobs in the future will be, let's say, automated through technology. So the only thing left is creativity, the creative dimension of the human being. Right now, for example, artists and creative people, they're like, okay, you know, it's like you guys are there in society, but come on, it's like, right, but in the future, they will be the ones who will, in some sense, be at the top of society. Let me tell you why. Because the new has a value that the past can never understand but can watch. You know. You know, there's this saying that when somebody does something wrong, they say their ancestors are trembling in their graves. You know, if somebody does something really wrong, you know. And if we imagine we behave like our ancestors too much, our ancestors would tremble. Why? Because they would be like, you guys are the new. Imagine your ancestors lived for the future, and then they saw the future was doing exactly what the past was. So it was as if, like, then what's the point of being in the future? You know. If people started behaving like how thousands of years ago, you know, people were behaving, it's as if then what's the point of being a human being now? So novelty is very important, innovation, creating a civilization that is encouraging reality. And the only way I have noticed, at least in my work, in science fiction work of mine called The Messenger of Giants, I have set the world in the year 5025, and the government, first of all, there's 9 parallel realities, and there's one government for all these 9 parallel realities of Earth. That government is called the Enlightened Society. And how the Enlightened Society began was that the first artist became like the leader of a nation. And this artist did not spend the budget of the nation on the military. Do you know, this artistic leader spent the budget on making the nation beautiful, as if there was this idea that if the environment is incredible, then the people in it will have more of a chance of being incredible. But if we are living in a way where it's as if like there's defeated human beings all around, then we have, in some sense, we cannot ignore that defeated archetype. Right, so in the future, it's as if there's going to come an artistic, let's say, revolution, right, to a point where people may, like the governments may ban, I'll get back to my sci-fi, but I'll say this, like, from now to the future, there may come a point where like the leaders of nations will be like, it's illegal to build a building that looks like another building. Do you know? That means it's as if you can't have buildings that are platonic solids, no longer cubic or rectangular buildings. Do you know? It's like that becomes illegal, and architects, all buildings and houses look like contemporary art, you know. It's as if I could totally see in the universities, there's going to be an artist like drawing something, and then there's going to be architects who are going to go to the what that artist has drawn and try to make that into a building, three-dimensional. Now, how can we inspire massive novelty all over the planet? I would say the educational system is a part of it. The educational system has to create explorers rather than followers of the past. That means nobody would be able in the future to graduate from university if they haven't explored something, you know, if they haven't found something new. So imagine physiologically, technology is helping us live so we don't have to worry about physical survival. Technology is assisting. Then it comes about, let's say, the inner life and how that inner life survives, and that inner life would be in a creative space. So what that means is we become no longer a single person, where it's as if right now people's sense of identity is, I'm a photograph, yeah, this is me, this is who I am, look at my Facebook, you know. Somebody in the chat section says, where do you have the book? The science fiction work of mine is unpublished. I'm giving you guys a preview here, and it's in the works, and I think it's going to be one of the greatest things I've developed in this lifetime, you know, because listen, right in these talks when I speak, I try to have an honor for how the present is. Right, that means all the ideological perspectives, but in my science fiction novel, guys, I've given myself freedom. That means there's everything. There's extraterrestrials, there's androids, you know, there's collective beings, like there's parts of space that are alive, and before a spaceship can travel through it, it has to gain intuitive authorization, you know, like there's but anyways, and of course, I gotta say this, that it's as if we started, when Drake has these lyrics where he says, we started from the bottom, now we're here. We started as an object projecting a mind, and with the development and crystallization of the free will, we are a mind moving a body, rather than just a body moving the mind or the experience of the mind. So it would mean that in the next 100 to 200 years, it's probably going to become way more real how we're living as minds. And when somebody talks about the mind, guys, at least in my view, even though I say inner realms and outer realms, through my own mystical, you can say, inclination, I will tell you that in my experience, there's a watcher. Right now, as I am giving this talk, this podcast, there's my physical body, and I can experience, like, I'm conscious that my voice is moving, I'm breathing, my body's here. But I am also conscious that behind my eyes, first of all, my imagination appears as a sort of cinematic experience. And that image I'm seeing in my mind, like right now my eyes are closed, the images I'm seeing in my mind, they are being watched. And they are being watched by an unknown witness. So really, the reason we don't know what the mind is because the mind is creating the definition of the body, but what is aware of the mind is not the mind. So it surpasses the creative space of the mind. So it's as if like we are we are space experiencing matter, but because we woke up from matter and there was a sort of forgetfulness of the space, it's as if like our real eyes are not shapes. That means we see shape as the intelligence, as the, let's say, universal intelligence we are, but the universal intelligence is not a shape. And there is certain esoteric circles, certain mystical circles where they have this idea that higher dimensions are, that means it's a sort of artistic effort. And of course, in the sign, when I was talking about the Enlightened Society, the first artist that created became a political leader, became a leader of a nation. What this artist did was started making the nation beautiful. For the first time, all the other nations stopped competing over a military budget. They started to compete over whose nation is more beautiful. So all the nations in the world started becoming incredibly beautiful, as if it's like time to draw the greatest artwork before the collective beyond individual future arrives. That means if individual human consciousness is a phase, then we have to make utilize this individual phase of life to them, and we have to max it out. And that would lead towards a creative angle, right? So in some talks of mine, I've talked about the advanced civilization, that the advanced civilization will become so advanced that it may go faster than the speed of light in its advancement, so it becomes an invisible civilization, right? We have this view that civilizations were destroyed, but imagine a civilization where it's advancing instantaneously, so it can't have a shape. It's always becoming, in the state of becoming. So in my science fiction novel, the moment one nation does it, all the other nations does it. And there's a speech I've written in one part of it, one chapter, where the Enlightened Society came, and the members of the Enlightened Society, it's so incredible in my science fiction novel, the way I explained it, that they're all just light. They're like humanoid light. That means the members of the Enlightened Society, they don't have a biological body or a physical body. They're just light, shaped like a person, And so the members of the Enlightened Society come to the world in the year 5025, where I've said also that it's divided between the traditionalists and the futurists. The traditionalists are those who are in time. They see a linearity to time as if it's going from past to present to future, but those who are the futurists, they don't see time. They see it as if it's one eternal moment, as if our civilization has entangled itself with the notion of time, but there may be those who are timeless among us in the future. So the Enlightened Society gives this next level speech where it stops the Hunger Games of ideological warfare or ideological truth. That means right now you can see, for example, religious institutions or even not religious institutions, every institution has its own idea, like this is what the world should be. Do you know? And so these ideological systems, as more people join in them, they become bigger, there will be a sort of Hunger Games of who has the truth, or whose truth will survive in the fittest way. So the Enlightened Society, remember the leaders of the Enlightened Society in the year 5025 in my novel, they come and say to people that all ideology is artwork, and what do human beings do with artwork? They don't destroy it, they preserve it, and they make it part of the heritage. That means all the religions, it's not that like militant atheists should be going and destroying the development of these ideological systems, but rather being like, okay, just like we have a Van Gogh painting, or we have like Da Vinci painting or a Picasso painting, the religious ideological systems are also art, and for the secular mind, art is the closest thing to spiritualism, to spirituality, to divinity. Because divinity, you can say, there was this story where they said this child fell from this balcony and this child hit the grass and nothing happened to the child. And people were like, it's a miracle of God. Do you know? So you can say if the unknown consequence is being seen as divine, or an unknown intervening factor with the expectation of the linear thought process. So the introduction of the unknown is divine. So the enlightened society gets rid of ideological warfare in the inner realms of human beings by declaring everything as art. That means there is no that's true, this is truth, that is truth. It is all the expressions of a changing universal cycle. This is why I feel a freedom to just share. Why? Because I know that it all changes. Everything changes. Even if I don't share, I know that it will go on to change. There's been days where I've had ideas and I wasn't near the laptop, or my phone didn't have battery or something, and the idea came to me and there was no pen or paper, and just I had to watch the idea in my inner realms, and I knew that that idea would pass and it's God forgotten. So there's so many things. It's kind of like the mind is not like a file cabinet, it's like a river. And so when I'm giving these talks, it's as if I've put my hand in the river, and whatever I'm picking up, I'm pulling out of the river and sharing it in this podcast. So if we realize that there is no such thing as an artist, but we are an artistic animal, we are a creative creature, and our survival is left to our creative ability, right? There's some people in society where they're trying to amplify something that has been created from before, and then there's some people in society where they introduce something new, something that has never been there before, and the karma of the new surpasses the karma of the past, regardless of how righteous you think it is or not. So I am saying that it's as if, think of it as if solid, liquid, gas. Right now, the way the human being is, it's like people are functioning like photographs. When the enlightened society in my novel says that it's like everything's artwork, the enlightened society is kind of saying as if everything is a film, right? And we can choose to kind of be actors as if we're a certain actor in one frame of the film, in one photograph of the film, but in some sense things are too dynamic for there to be war over, right? So that means when all 8 billion human beings on a rock in the middle of nowhere, they realize they're just 8 billion human creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere. Do you know how much of that hatred or agenda-based hidden thinking is going to go away? Because people are going to be like, yeah, we're just travelers in the space-time continuum. There's this incredible Sufi story where there was this merchant back in the day, and with this caravan, he goes to this town, and this is the town where not a lot of people come. It's like a town in the deserts or something, and this merchant goes there, and he suddenly calls everybody, hey guys, it's like there's products here, come and buy it, and people from all the different houses quickly come outside and they buy what they need. Then there was one person, and there's this merchant businessman there, and this there's one person who needs something, but he doesn't have the money, right? And the merchant sees that this person needs it, and there's no way he can compensate for it, so he just gives it to the person, right? Now that person who didn't have the money, he looks at the merchant and he's like, I don't have money to give you, but I'm going to tell you something. There is an enlightened man in the Sufi tradition. The person who was enlightened, they said he had the pearl, like a pearl is hidden in an oyster, right? So somebody who had realized the nature of reality, it was as if they have the pearl. So this person who can't pay for the product but still got the product, he says, listen, there's a person at the end of this town, this Sufi dervish, and this enlightened dervish, go and ask him about the pearl. And so this businessman is like, okay, he finishes his business and he goes to the edge of the town, and he sees there's this house where the door of the house looks like it's made of tree bark. I wanted to say Shrek, you know what I mean? Like Shrek's door in the film, in the animation film, but it's like a simpler house than all the other houses that are there, right? So this merchant goes by the door, knocks on the door, and this Sufi mystic, this dervish opens the door. And the dervish sees that this person has come, and something that people may not know, back in the day, Hospitality was really a huge part of people's life. Why? Because they had this notion of the divine, and when a guest arrived, when a guest came, it was as if it's like a divine thing. Imagine a town where nobody has been there for years, and suddenly a traveler comes. It's as if it's like a divine incident for that town, you know. So this dervish welcomes this merchant into the house, and the merchant goes and he sits down, and then the merchant and then the dervish goes to prepare tea, you know. So this merchant looks at the house of this dervish, and he sees that he only has a mat, he only has a lamp, and then there's the kettle. He doesn't have anything else. He doesn't have any furniture or anything in his house, right? And I mean, there is the tea also. And probably like a bucket of water or something, but anyways, there is barely anything in his house, right? So the merchant, to create small talk, he looks at the Sufi dervish and he says, "My friend," while the dervish is preparing the tea, you know, pouring the tea into the cup, you know, the merchant says, "My friend, you know, where's your furniture?" And in that instant, the dervish suddenly becomes intense, and he looks at the merchant and he says, "Where's your furniture?" And the merchant is just a bit overwhelmed, and he looks at the dervish and he says, "What do you mean, where's my furniture? I'm a traveler here. You know, I'm traveling. You know, I don't have furniture. I don't need furniture." The dervish smiles and looks at him and he says, "So am I. So am I. I'm also traveling the space-time continuum." You know, and some minimalists hearing me right now, you know, this is like spiritual minimalism. So the dervish, the whole moral of the story is that this guy, the merchant, suddenly realizes that it's as if the awareness that appears as consciousness, the consciousness is the traveler. And the awareness behind this is like the reality that is just going through dimension, you know. So the reason I shared this story is that if we suddenly see that we're all travelers, we would try to create the world in a way, an advanced civilization will have the attitude that, all right, we're travelers here, we are tourists to manifestation. And so to create a great tourist experience would be the point. That means everybody would be in some sense provided with what they require to have a smooth journey, rather than having a sort of everybody has to get this or everybody has to get that, rather trying to see what people need to enhance their journey in this life. You know, even me talking right now, like this journey of my life so far, every day I have woken up and I've done different actions, I've said different things, but believe it or not, everything's changing. Like, I don't have the same body as I had like 20 years ago. You know, I don't have the same perceptions of reality as I had 20 years ago. So what this means is that the world is changing within an unconditional observance, the conditions of the world. By the way, guys, when I talk, I sometimes quickly go past concepts, and when I look at the chat section, when there's a question or a comment, if you can write in context and then a dash and write whatever it's in context to, like in brackets, then I would know what the statement is about. Do you know? So just write in context to, and then write your comment or write your question. So the idea is that we create an incredible tourist experience, and every person that looks at another person just acknowledge a fellow comrade, a fellow traveler. Now there is people like Marshall McLuhan, Buckminster Fuller, where they've shared the incredible concept of Spaceship Earth, and if it's Spaceship Earth, it's as if we're all crew members of this rock floating in the middle of space, you know, being piloted through space based on natural universal laws, you know, and gravitation and whatnot. right? So it's as if we're all crew members of one world event, right? And these crew members are coming and going and being replaced. And if you take the metaphor, the analogy of, like, let's say a soccer team, a football team, right? It's as if the soccer ball is, sometimes it's in the defender has it, sometimes the goalkeeper has it, sometimes the striker has it, sometimes the mid laner has it, right? And the point is that they all have to play their part. Like, you can't have the goalkeeper suddenly wanting to score a goal. You know, you can't have the defender suddenly wanting to be a mid laner. You see, so it's as if in this reality, it's as if we're 8 billion human beings. We not only have to develop an incredible not class system where there's hierarchies of judgment and destruction, but we gotta have different roles in this theatrical existential performance. You know, it's as if we're on stage right now. Anybody who's alive, you're on stage. All those children who are unborn, it's as if they're not on stage yet. And so the ball goes from the defender to the goalkeeper, suddenly to the striker, you know, and every person has to play their part. But if everybody wants to attain, we're in 2021, everybody wants to be a billionaire, right? And so if everybody becomes a billionaire, in some sense, it kind of defeats the purpose of having spectrums to reality, you know. So it's as if the point of life is not everybody to be the same, because if everybody becomes the same, that's a world of clones. You know, it's rather everybody becoming skillful in the dimension they find themselves. That means if, for example, even a kingdom, imagine a kingdom, instead of a soccer field, imagine a kingdom, and this kingdom, there's a baker, there's a warrior, there's a king, there's a artist, you know what I mean? There's a chef, there's so many different roles, right, which all in some sense make the kingdom. That means the behavior of the living organism in the collective space suggests the walls of that collective space, you know, suggests the type of world we find ourselves in. And because we all have different DNAs, everybody can present and they can serve their realm. You can serve your world in a way where nobody else can, because you have eyes nobody else has. That's the value of intelligence. There is no such thing as smart or stupid people. Maybe if there's one game they all have to play, sure, there's going to be some people who are good at that game and some people who are bad at that game. But everybody has a perception that has never existed here before until they existed. And so beyond the judgments of intelligence will advance. So, imagine we advanced civilization in the inner realms, and in the outer realms we had creative people who, and something it's gonna catalyze this whole thing is the multidimensional perspective. Right now, reality and civilization is caught in the dualistic enchantment of language. Language is a dualistic system. That means it's constantly right or wrong in contrast to a previous image, or a potential image. But when we realize it's multidimensional, that means every person has angles to them that are not visible, that are unknown. That means right now as I'm talking, my voice projects to the audience the known dimensions of myself, you know. But you know how many unknown dimensions there are, and the truth of it is that I am not my voice. Nobody is their voice. Their voice is a part of their whole intelligence of the moment. We think we are human beings, but we are being human, and the human is found in the space of the mind. So right now, it's as if my body is in the space of my mind, this laptop and this cup are in the space of my mind, but my free will can move my hand in the air, but it can move the atoms that constitute my hand in the air. They cannot move like this coffee cup in the air, you know. So our hearts are beyond the dualistic frameworks of judgment, and our hearts will decide the future of our brain if we care to have a multidimensional patience, but also a care for what is alive. You know, right now we're eating animals. I mean, that's a bit, you know, kind of messed up. That's kind of creating a karma for the species, where if an alien, imagine some like next level kind of savage aliens came on Earth, they'd be like, or some let's say cruel aliens landed on Earth in the future, they'd be like, look at these human beings eating inferior species, why shouldn't we eat inferior species? You know. So we have to also find a strategy where, I don't know, we make, I don't know, vegetables taste like steak or something. But we try to have some sort of ability to kind of let nature pretty much, it's as if we don't make other species go extinct, because we feel that's the only approach to our survival. People who are interested in what I'm my ideas on the future, go to the channel and look up all the videos that are about Civilization 2.0. And you know, this is really, I would say, a human quality. You see animals, for example, their instincts set in, and they become vicious and violent, and they can like fight off each other, you know. But the human being has a sort of empathy where it doesn't have to just fight or run away. It can choose to go beyond the dimensions of fear and attempt to understand. One of the biggest things that happened in my life was that first of all, it's not that I got rid of fear. There's some things I fear, you know, some things I don't. But the fear is not from the past. It's like in the present, if it's a dangerous situation or something, right? But the biggest thing I realize is that when somebody fears something, they avoid what they fear. They don't try to understand it, look at it, try to see how it works, right? So if we can replace fear with understanding, and there's this space of multidimensional tolerance, there will be an advanced level of communication. There will no longer be like people feeling good or bad after conversations, but people just seeing more out of the world picture. You know, when I listen to other people, I'm not thinking like, okay, is this what this person is saying right or wrong? I'm saying, okay, this other person has an inner realm, right, which I don't have, and in what kind of world are their eyes walking in what kind of world is their mind functioning in? And there is 8 billion. That means if we had explored everything in the world, there would be unknown dimensions to people which we still have not seen. By the way, guys, anybody interested, there's a Discord community, which sometimes after the episodes I go there, called School of Athens 2.0. You can find it in the main page. And anyways, so what I'm trying to say is, like, if I was to kind of explain like a cinema, like a film, so how the future may look like before cyberspace provides multiple bodyhood, and before we access collective spaces of mind, individuals can experience the decency of their naturalism with a collective care where how would I say this? It's as if before we become telepathic, or that collective mind sets in, there's going to be no need to communicate. That means right now I'm using my voice as an individual to share something. If we were all connected in a collective mind, let's say cyberspace mind in the future, then there would be no need to communicate. So it could be that it goes like there's the end of speech in the future if technology makes us truly collective, right? So before that point, we have to experience our communication in ways that it hasn't happened before, right? And that comes from considerations of perspectives. And they say that if, this is something actually I say, that an answer closes the world, a question opens it. So we need an influx of questions, incredible questions, that will make the person in whatever state of mind or funk they're in to be pulled out of that and to be driven, to be driven in some sense, start having a relationship with the unknown, right? As if every person at the end of their life, they're like, all right, civilization that is advancing, this is the portfolio of my great work, this is how far my eyes could go, do something with it, Every person, I feel, should write a book. Write a book about their honest experience of life. With, let's say, in the future, I've perceived a library of names, where it's like a library and every person who has lived and whatever content they've created is stored in this library. So imagine that you're walking in like this, between the shelves of this library, and you see that every book just has a name. There is no like title, you just see the name of the person. Okay guys, so my attention has come to the chat section. Justin says, would personality be useful in a realm like that, referencing the end of language? See, the end of language, the end of when we become a collective mind. I wouldn't say, you see, the personality is animated. Alan Watts had this thing where he said, I don't remember the exact quote, but he was sharing this idea that your ego is the idea of self you have in the moment. And the Japanese say that the man is the room he's in. So it's as if we're walking in different environments in the outer realms. In these different environments, there's stimulus, new things happening, and these new things animate. They change our personality if we are to respond to them. It would mean not it would not mean the end of personality. It would mean incredibly fast personality shifts. That means that right now the person experiences themselves as a simple idea of self. In the future, in 1 minute, you might be able to experience like 1,000 senses of self. Or you may be able to, in any moment, be able to see through the eyes of a person in another part of the world in the era of the collective mind. Cyberspace collective mind. The yogis were doing this like thousands of years ago naturally, but because that art is in some sense being lost, so it's gonna archaically revive through cyberspace probably. For me, when I've looked at many ideological systems, and especially those of the past, I've realized they're all in a conflict of truth and illusion. As if we're in an illusion and there's a greater truth, and in some sense we need to surpass this illusion to go to that truth. But when I was thinking about the concept of the illusion and the truth, how can an illusion exist without the truth? That means beyond the simulation is being kept by the real. The truth is projecting the illusion. It's as if the illusion is the effect in time, and the truth is the cause, the timeless cause. We may suddenly realize that just like how a person opens their eyes and they access the world, there was eyes that opened up in the universe. It's as if we are the imagination of a god, or we're the dream of a god, and when the god wakes up, it's as if everything, that could be an implication of the apocalypse. the heart of the person. At the beginning of the talk, I was saying, imagine a person going out in like 2021 in reality, and something happens, and they have like access to the geometry of the moment, its designs, but then there's the emotions, right? And the emotions kind of are like an ability to recreate what the other person is going through yourself, and then caring for that, you know. It's as if like we don't see what others are, we see what we are in others, because we don't have their eyes. So there's a sort of self-reflection going on, and if the self becomes more collective, it's as if we will see the greatness of the species and the individual, and then we will care for every individual, right? That means if there's an individual in an advanced civilization where the individual is like, I can't do this anymore, you know, it's like I don't want to live anymore, right? Then the advanced civilization will be like, okay, if you don't want to live for yourself, that's in the domain of your free will, that's okay, but don't forget that the species has its eyes open, right? The concept of extinction is like the species will close its eyes. What the heart does, the heart space, let's say, from a mystical kind of, through a sort of, let's say, mystical context, is that the heart is timeless. It's the timeless dimensions of the self. You know, there was this person who was asked about their history, and the person's like, I have 3 histories, and the interviewer was like, what do you mean you have 3 histories? You know. And the person's like, there is my individual self, which has been born in this life from the moment I was born to the moment to it's going to die, and that has a sort of history. Then there is my universal self, which the history of that is from the beginning of the universe till now, as if the mind is a universal phenomenon, but the body is like a phenomenon in the universe on Earth. Or the mind is a universal event, and the body is like an event, a smaller event in that universal event. And then the person said, there's a part of me which has no history. So as if solid, liquid, gas, there's the timeless self, you can say. Then there is like the liquid self, which is like the universal history, and then there's the individual self, where that's like solid, you know. So the heart is the observer's ability to not solidify the relationship of the subjects and objects they see in the moment, and to have the patience to see how the moment goes forth beyond their inner realm's conviction of what it has to be. So they say patience is a virtue. Believe it or not, that virtue is what's going to help us in the challenges ahead in the future. And believe it or not, there is challenges. Like in the movie Independence Day, for example, aliens land on Earth, and you know, they say we're celebrating our, you know, it's as if all the nations suddenly unified. It's as if all human beings were like, all right, let's get this thing off our turf, then fight among each other, right? So because there hasn't come a greater challenge, and our galaxy is very quiet, you know, that means we don't see, it's not like we look at the sky and we see stars moving in a line as if it's a highway. You know, it's like we're not there yet. So it's kind of like, they say that there's this old saying in warfare where they would say the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So right now because we don't have that enemy of my enemy, we don't have this greater challenge that surpasses the human dimensions. Human beings are fighting with themselves, right? So it's as if we are one species of Homo sapien, but this Homo sapien has a sort of civil war. It's as if there's a civil war going on in the species where there's conflicts between groups of human beings. If there was an emergency, if like an extraterrestrial landed in the future where we had to do something as a collective, right? Or imagine an AI or super intelligent computers, if they wake up, they would kind of be like a alien, you know? So we would have to immediately retaliate towards that. So a way that we can organize the human species in its ability to endure towards the futures, you know, towards the future, would be in some sense projecting great challenges as if they're already here, right? So for example, when I talk about advanced communication, there's moments in my mind where I'm like, okay, what if like in the future extraterrestrials land, but these extraterrestrials, like they don't vocally speak, and there is an inner realm invasion, for example, or if there's an outer realm invasion, right? So the species immediately gets its act together. It's as if they say nobody's stupid in an emergency. You know, a person could be super lazy when an emergency happens. Like, where did all that motivation come from? So it's the intensity and the challenges that we set for ourselves. And the species, if the species sets a goal for an incredible advanced civilization, we will see such progress in the outer realms and the inner realms. And I would say, for some people's comments in the chat section, my personal view is that the future, we right now have location-based thinking, you know, but in the future, we will be everything in the very far future, you know. So this fear of our individual life is like the luxury of the phase we're in the shaped phase of our being, you know. And really, it's about caring. You know, this took me a while to understand, and it's still something I'm learning more and more. Where a person needs to be able to care for themselves, they need to care for others, and they need to care for the world. And when these three are as if you're in full caring mode, as if like airplane mode on your phone, you know, you just, you know, shift into this mentality where you want to see life advance rather than be dismissed out of existence, then it wouldn't even be an artificial utopia where we're like, yeah, we're all gonna hold hands and sing kumbaya. No. It's just going to be a sort of hidden dimension, not a hidden dimension, but an additional dimension of honor, of collective progress. It would be the greatest future for our species will come about when the victory of others becomes the victory of self. You know, there's this view that there's this individual hell, and then the person got out of the individual hell, they got into the individual heaven. But then there's this view that once the person got into the individual heaven, they noticed the collective hell, and then once the collective hell, they get out of the collective hell, they attain the collective heaven. We have not experienced the collective heaven, or as I would term it, the advanced civilization. And when I'm pursuing this advanced civilization, guys, my strategy is that if we create enough backup systems, that means we're 8 billion people. Imagine somehow we manage to create 8 billion backup systems. Even if there would be moments where the civilization will falter, the backup systems would come into motion. So it's as if we are creating a greater potential for our success than the actuality of our failure, you know. And this talk, guys, I'm giving, it's actually, there is so much more to it, but I feel like bringing this episode to a conclusion, I would say that if you're a person who you have seen yourself first and the others, pilot into the other side and see how your karma becomes different. If you're someone who has just lived for others, pilot to yourself and see what will happen. Do you know? And the idea is that we are a growing creature we are a changing creature in a changing world, and there is no one who could be a single idea. I mean, names, sure, a person are the skyscrapers becoming taller, and then you see like a city lifting up into the air. Whoever you are listening to this moment right now, your eyes are here. May the great work of for as we go forth, one thing is left. Rise, mankind, rise. Our eyes are touching the beyond. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope this episode was helpful. And I'll be in the Discord for those interested.